My name is Deborah Gilels. I'm going to be the moderator tonight. And, in Los Angeles, I'm a publicist and a media consultant. And so I represent a couple anime companies, and 11 Arts is one of them. I also represent TMS. Does anybody watch Megalobox on, Adult Swim? Yeah, that's my show. So, and I do the Lupin and, this anime as well. And also, represent many movies and actors and things like that. But I really I love LA Film School. I've lectured here many times. And I've actually had an event in this auditorium as well. I'm on the board of the LA Femme Film Festival. So one year, maybe it was about 4 years ago, we had our award show here. So it was really, it's a great school. So let me ask you a question. How many people like the film? And how many people, regularly go to see anime? Oh, wow. Oh, cool. And how many of you, well, here's one of my cohorts, Jimmy. So how many of you, felt that this was something that you guys are studying animation and this is something that you'd want to do in the future? Oh, okay, cool. So those guys back there, they're all anime people. So I'm going to introduce, Jimmy Doyle, and he can tell you about what he does for 11 Arts and specifically what he did for this, film.
Sure. So naturally, I'm with 11 Arts. We're the company that distributed the film, so we're not the filmmaker. I'm sorry, but you saw him earlier, I believe. But so what I do, I'm the distribution coordinator for 11 Arts, so a lot of my job is handling both the planning and then the logistics around actually releasing a film. So it's a sort of job that I think when I was in film school, studying screenwriting, it wasn't something that I necessarily knew even really existed in the way that I do it. You don't really think a lot about distribution when you're going to film school. You think more about, I got to make my film. But there's a ton of work in the distribution field, and it's also kind of interesting. It's a little more on kind of the boring businessy side of things. But so a lot of what I do is both planning out how we're going to structure our release. So it's very interesting and compelling at kind of our level because it's super small compared to, when something like Shazam gets released, everybody knows it's going to get released in 3,000 theaters. It's going to get released kind of the same way. The marketing's going to be the same with us. The marketing budgets are a lot smaller. The releases can kind of flux between, we've done releases in the last year anywhere between 90 theaters and 500, 600. So that's really kind of a big range of how we're actually releasing the films. So,
well, how do you decide, in what city, how do you pick, for your movies? And you go by each film, what the movie's about.
Sure, yeah. So it depends on the film. So obviously, if something's a big franchise, like in the past, our company has released something like Sword Art Online Ordinal Scale, which that was a really big release. That one we did through Fathom Events. So they do the way that their ownership structure works is that Fathom Events is owned by the big three cinema chains, Regal, Cinemark, AMC. So because of that, they're able to release a lot wider and do 2 big event dates and then be in maybe 600 theaters. So we just did that with A Silent Voice, which is a really big title, very, very popular. We were able to re-release that and basically double the gross of the film from the initial run because it had just gained so much popularity within the past year that it's been out. Whereas something like Penguin Highway, we did in only 250 theaters because it's a much smaller release. It's also it's not a franchise. It's a brand new studio. It's a brand new director. It's a brand new, mostly property. There's a novel, but the light novel is only out in Japan. It actually comes out in the US. The translation comes out this weekend. So for this one, we had to build the brand from scratch. And we still went pretty wide, I think, for us in 250 theaters in the US and Canada, and most of what we're doing is trying to find the best location so that everyone who wants to see the film can see it without putting a strain on our own resources. Because obviously, every time we ship out the film, we have to send out a DCP that costs money. We have to actually ship it, that costs money. And then occasionally with theaters, you also have to pay a VPF, which is a virtual print fee. You used to have to pay a print fee when people were showing film in order to, and that was paying for all the film screening equipment. Now technically it's paying for the projecting equipment, even though they already have it and it doesn't really cost anything, but they charge you for it, so you have to do it. So everything has like a little bit of a price and stuff like that. So it's figuring out how wide can we go without going too wide, also so that we can target all our marketing, especially with social media now. We can use Facebook, and I can go on Facebook and pick a place where we're gonna market and know, you know, I'm gonna go and only market to people on Instagram in a 5-mile radius from this theater, from this zip code. So it's all really specific and targeted in how we're doing that.
What was your biggest challenge, you know, with the film?
I think part of it, and you guys just saw the film, so you'll kind of understand this, is it's a little unclear who the audience is for this film, I think sometimes. It's, it looks like when you cut a trailer for it, it can kind of look like a Disney-esque kids film, but it's not in a lot of ways. It's a little bit darker. It's certainly the ending is like a little, it's not confusing. I think it's like if you get it, you get it, but it's not clean. Right. Even though to me it screams E.T., which is a very clean, very Hollywood, very family-friendly movie. So that's sort of the, when we were looking at our marketing, those are kind of the touchstones we were looking at, is how do we show it as kind of that sort of classic throwback summer adventure that's a little, maybe a little bit more adult than something like Frozen, but it's not necessarily much more adult than something like E.T., which is, you know, about a kid with divorced parents who then, you know, it leaves you weepy at the end of it, which is kind of somewhat similar to this. Did anyone cry? I cried. Nice.
Oh, you cried? No, that's good, really. You know, one thing I really love about, like, also doing PR for anime is that there are so many outlets that, like, really like to cover it. And even on some of the YouTube reviews, I mean, I've seen where, like, hundreds of thousands of people have watched it. So, you know, like, it's very, like, it's definitely its own niche. Do you guys, at this point, you know, like, I want to open it up to you guys and see if you have any questions or anything you wanted to, you know, ask us or talk about. Sure.
I just wondered, did they get the context of it off of I think it was an animated cartoon, like Big Red Dog or something like that. I think that was a cartoon. But where did they get the idea to make it like a book in motion animated thing? Like, you know, most of the artistic drawings in books. Like, was that an aspect that they thought of would work good with it, or it's just something that they, you know, fundamentally work with?
I can't, you know, fully speak to all the stylistic things, just as more on the distribution end. But from what I've gathered on a lot of the stylistic stuff, a lot of the, actually one of the co-founders of Studio Colorido is a former Studio Ghibli animator, and I think you'll see a lot of kind of stylistic similarities between some of the Ghibli films in this. So it's definitely, I think, owes something to kind of that lineage of anime style. It feels kind of right within that kind of classical anime style. And there's also, you know, some, I believe, at least with some of the cover art, there's some illustrations that go along with the light novel as well that I definitely inform some of it. And all the plot, obviously, isn't, you know, deeply indebted to the light novel, which is by Tamahiko Marimi, who has also been adapted in a couple other animes, the Tatami Galaxy, and then also Night is Short, Walk On Girl.
Do they have any kind of advancement toward that particular genre of artistic animation? Are they, you know, they won't advance it. It'll still be as in the structure that it's in now. It'll still be like that. They're not looking, you know, farther as in, you know, way to have HD and
Um,
3D it or?
Not like with this studio, it's more 2D. I think what's kind of cool about a lot of Japanese animation is that you see techniques like 2D hand drawn animation that you're not going to see, in current U.S. animation, because everything for the major studios at least is 3D, except for something like Missing Link, which also came out this week, which is um, stop motion. But otherwise, you're not seeing a lot of like 2D hand drawn stuff. So that's I think what's kind of cool is that it isn't advancing. Though there are and we've done some anime like this too that has 3D animation. So there's lots of different. I can't speak, I guess, to this studio specifically on what kind of stuff they're looking to do, but in the future. But I think part of the charm is almost that classic style, personally.
In regards to the distribution here, are you in contact, or this film is originally from Japan, right?
Yeah.
So do you personally have a team that works specifically launching this in the U.S., or do you guys have a team that does Japan and the U.S. at the same time?
So we're specifically in the U.S. Yeah. So the way that our business works at 11 Arts is that we acquire the films from Japan. So we're purchasing the rights to screen it in Japan or in the U.S. And then so it's already typically the way it's kind of interesting is that typically the way that it's sold is we're probably purchasing the film, and it varies film by film, but we're usually acquiring those rights around the time that it's getting released in Japan, actually. And then usually they try to sell it a little bit before, actually, typically, because then we can't look at the Japanese performance either way to figure out how that cost is going to shape out. It really varies, but then we'll acquire it, and we do specifically just we're moving into maybe some different stuff, but right now just North America, so U.S. and Canada releases is just what we do. So that's kind of our specialization as a company is in that localization and bringing it out to this market and figuring out how it's going to work with the U.S. market and figuring out how we can maximize the title so most people see it, so we make the most, so that also then they're making money off of that too, and it's getting right back to Japan.
Awesome.
Oh.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Do companies go to you, or do you go to them to acquire licenses?
Both. So we have contacts at our company that know to come to us and know to talk to us about different films, but we're also always reaching out, what do you have? What's next? What are you working on? We're looking at films starting from the script stage. Quite often we're, starting the conversations about acquiring a film long before the film's finished. So we're looking at storyboards. We're looking at whatever they can give us to actually show us. And usually a lot of that happens at film markets. I don't know how much you guys know about those, but sometimes these are dedicated film markets that are just for industry people to meet up. Sometimes these are film festivals, so something like Cannes or something, or even like Sundance. Those aren't things where we're acquiring a lot of stuff for anime, but Berlin is a big anime acquisition one, Berlin Film Festival. So people go to Berlin, everyone's going to see the films that they're screening there, but also there's a lot of meetings being taken, and then that's where we're going to be looking at storyboard scripts, stuff like that, to actually figure out what we're going to acquire and talking to the companies about what they have coming up next.
Yes. Okay. Next. Yes.
This is partially our entertainment business department here.
Oh, cool.
And these students are working in entertainment business. So when you say the boring business side, you hit your audience right in the eyes here.
Great.
It's great that you're here in distribution and that you're here in marketing and publicity. So thank you for being here. One question that I have for you has to do with distribution in terms of, and I don't know what you can disclose here, but what kind of a return would you expect to see for your company on a film like this with a distribution push?
I can't speak to the exact numbers of it, but like it, and it really depends because the tough fact with distribution is that we can do a lot of work and we can do a lot of things, but ultimately it's kind of a tricky market to know exactly what your return's gonna be. It's not quite like home videos, a lot easier to predict, I think, in a lot of ways than theatrical, especially when we're asking you to go to 2 event dates. Most of our screenings have only 2 dates, so if someone gets sick, if something happens, if there's a snowstorm on the East Coast, we're gonna see a direct effect on that on our business. So with the exact numbers, it varies. What is kind of interesting, I guess, that I can talk about is the way the splits kind of will differ for us between theaters, which is where we're getting a much better portion of the ticket sales when we're working with independent theaters versus when we're working with like the major cinema chains like Cinemark and AMC, because obviously they're more powerful corporations. They're dealing with these bigger events. They're dealing with the Shazams and all that stuff that they're not super concerned with. The feeling from them, which I understand on their end, is we're lucky to get screens because we're competing. If a theater's got 12 screens, we're competing for a screen on that one night. So that becomes a little bit difficult. So we're not going to get as strong a split as we will at theaters like more independents or more independent chains like Reading Cinemas or Alamo or something like that, where they actually want our content and they're even reaching out to us specifically saying, hey, we heard you're doing this new film. We'd like to screen it, because they're more interested in those newer titles. It has probably more of a higher ceiling on what sort of money it's going to make them. And then also, for a lot of those theaters too, it's also about just like the vibe of having those titles as well. If you're servicing your customers and getting anime fans to keep coming month after month. I know some theaters have talked to me about starting like a monthly anime series, just because even if some of them don't do great, just getting anime fans to come back month after month, that's a really huge market that people want to, start servicing more.
Also, I want to introduce Chris Platt. He's another executive with 11 Arts. So, Chris, before you jump in, could you just, tell them about what you do? And it's also, Chris actually filmed the little vignette that you saw at the beginning. He was just in Japan with the director, so.
Yeah, so hey, thanks. Sorry I'm late. I'm Chris. Yeah, I work at 11 Arts. Mainly what I do is I'm kind of hands-on with a lot of the marketing, a lot of the strategy. Localization, I have a big part in. That's dubbing, that's checking the subtitles. When it comes to home video, that's all the written materials, any kind of booklets, any kind of like promotional materials that we're bringing from Japan, making sure that those are true to the original intentions, because that's very important to us, and making sure that voice comes across. And there's just a lot, there's a lot that goes into it. Definitely my job isn't as focused as Jimmy's, where he does distribution. I kind of fill in a lot of gaps when it comes to things that just have to get done. And that's probably a really fun part of my job as well, that I get to see so many different parts of the distribution model and kind of how these things go.
Did you want to add on to his question? Or?
As a distributor, it's like in terms of return on your investment, I mean, the sky's the limit, really. I mean, like one really prime example would be Get Out, right? Like has like a tiny budget relatively, right? But it just comes back so many times over. And of course you want that, but I mean, just to have kind of a healthy business model, to continue to kind of front the capital to acquire, and to pay for all the things that we need, as well as our overhead. I'd say,
But
maybe like 5 times is like a good amount. I mean, it's all relative, you know, as well. Some projects are smaller than others, some are larger. You invest more in the larger ones and hoping for a larger return. So it really is kind of case by case.
And jumping in there, I think like some of it is you just need, you know, a title to pop, like you said, like Get Out. But for us, it's kind of like something like A Silent Voice, which we released it once, and then we released the dub 3 months later, and then a year after that, we re-released it again and doubled the gross, and then we released the Blu-ray, which is currently so sold out that I'm not going to have any copies to take to Boston with me this weekend for Anime Boston, which is another stream now of revenue coming in with doing merchandising at cons and things like that. And now we're starting to create our own merchandise. So that's, I think, something that's kind of benefited us, and that is really the linchpin too to a lot of theatrical distribution, is it's not really just the theatrical now, it's the whole downstream business. And if anything, some of the way we look at theatrical is obviously we want to make money on it, obviously we want it to do really well, but if at worst it's a big marketing push for the title itself and then we're able to make that on the downstream, that kind of works for us.
Great. Next question. Oh, yes.
On this one, I can't speak to it just because we acquired it and I wasn't kind of involved in that acquisition process, and I'm not actually sure. I'm not sure what stuff we even really looked at for the acquisition. We might have actually seen the film before we acquired it for this one, but I'm not sure. Because I was talking about earlier, you know, how we sometimes we see storyboards, we see the script phase, stuff like that.
Gotcha. Yeah, unfortunately, because we are kind of like a secondary market to Japan, we really don't see a lot of the production side of these projects. That is something that we definitely aspire to, being a producer for like an anime film. But that's a whole another conversation. But I mean, in terms of our conversations with the director, you know, it is based on a source material. The author of that source material is very renowned in the anime space. He's already had 2 or 3, actually, I think, projects adapted from his work.
Yeah.
So definitely, in terms of revisions, I'm sure there are plenty where they maybe want to take creative liberties, but his word was probably law in that case. But sorry, I can't say any more on that.
Excuse me. And Atsuko, could you tell them a little bit about what you do at 11 Arts, and then, you know, you have your own mic too.
I think you're sitting on it.
Sorry about that. Hi, my name is Atsuko, and I work in marketing at 11 Arts. I come from Japan, so I am actually excited to be introducing a lot of Japanese IP to the very keen American audience. Since I just came here, I would like to, you know, jump into the conversation of what we're discussing. So.
Well, I think we're just ready for. You had a question, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, all right. So I'm completely lost when it comes to anime because I just don't watch anime. But like, is that a big market for something to be in theaters like this, like or like for this to be in a theater? Like, is that a big market, or is it more like a take home, like you buy it, like type deal?
Both, but anime is a pretty big and growing theatrical market actually. So when you look at like Fathom Events, which their whole business is event cinema, and we work with them on some events. One of the big pillars of their business is anime. That's probably one of the biggest. It's anime, and then they also do like classic. That's probably another big section of their business, like TCM.
And on that, like what you said in the opening, like this had to
So in Japan, one thing that's very interesting that we realized uh, is anime isn't anime the same way we see anime as anime. There's a lot of anime. Um, but to kind of give you an example, so I don't know if any of you have been to Anime Expo or even just like a Comic Con, right? So in that environment, right, anime is kind of like this thing that's like still it's kind of niche. You know, it's got their following, you got people dressing up, it's this whole thing, right? But when we were in Japan a couple weeks ago to do that interview and a bunch of other business stuff, we got to go to a convention, very similar to like an Anime Expo or a Comic Con. It was huge, and the thing that you notice about the demographic there is you have everybody. I literally mean like you just have a spread of young kids to like older adults. They come in their suits after work. They come like in just like everyone's just it's like a normal day, you know. But they decided to go to the anime convention, you know, because like it's just such a common thing. It's like Pixar and Disney to us. We don't think twice about like, oh, I mean, yes, they are like family films first and foremost, right? That's their brand. But ultimately, you don't really think about, oh, what is the niche of that? Because people just kind of accept it as like, oh, this is a medium, you know, and like if it's interesting, I'll go.
You're gonna have an audience for the or a targeted audience within somewhere in that range is what you're saying.
Right. And then especially for Penguin Highway, you know, it's not so much catered to like the younger demographic that wants like a lot of action or like the very kind of spiky haired anime aesthetic. You know, this is very much like more catered towards like a global audience. You know, it's more about the themes, it's more about the characters than about like certain tropes that you'll see in more mainstream anime, especially series.
So I have a question for Atsuko.
Mhm.
So from a marketing perspective, what were some of your challenges in working on Penguin Highway?
Okay, so as this may have already been discussed, but since it's not a franchise title, and the author of the original novel, Tomihiko Morimi, does not have the same kind of recognition, we had the struggle of finding how to um, get the title recognized by the American viewers, and that itself is a challenge. So we did have to start marketing earlier on. We also did. We were lucky in some ways because Yen Press. Um, some of you may be familiar with that publication, but they mainly publish English novels of Japanese novels and mangas. So for this one, they have scheduled an English light novel released on April 26th. And so we were able to work together with them on that. So it's a little bit of everything, but we did have to find partners and also not just the anime watchers, but also the book readers to find people who might be potentially be interested to follow both. But I would say that in the end, we were able to gain momentum, but it does take a while compared to some other franchises that you might be more familiar with.
Well, and jumping off of that and kind of jumping off of what Chris said too, I think like what's interesting is even though this is theoretically a movie that can appeal to a broader audience and it's not like that, like Chris said, like that spiky hair, like classical like action, you know, Naruto anime or something like that. If anything, I actually think that's probably makes it more difficult sometimes to market though to this audience because when you have in the US that like anime expo crowd is really a bit more inclined to come out for that more hardcore kind of classic style anime and maybe not something like this which is a little you know has more in common with ET than it does with like Dragon Ball in a ton of ways. So I think that makes it kind of it's interesting because it's actually when you come to the US, the more anime it is, the more it sells itself. When it's a little bit less anime, unless it has that Studio Ghibli tag on it, it's you have to kind of build that brand up from the ground floor in a different way.
Any other question? Yes.
Given you were in touch with the director, you were able to talk to him. Did you get anything out of him for this film? Like any questions, any answers? Like, what are his thoughts on the film? Did you get anything from him?
Oh yeah, so we actually had an AMA on Reddit, which was super fun. Unfortunately, it was only like we only had an hour for that, and then we switched to the interview. So we do have an interview as well. That's where we got that clip. But yeah, one of the big things that he kept coming back to in his answers was this feeling of childhood, you know, and really capturing that wonder. Um, that was really important to him, and you can really tell that in how he works too, and what's important to him, because a big thing about this project is it's Studio Colorido's first feature film. It's his first feature film, right? And so he and his team are kind of venturing into these uncharted waters together. You know, they're all just making this gigantic project for the first time when they're used to doing maybe like 20, 30 minutes tops, right? And for him, the soul of that project was really important to maintain, you know, making sure that the team worked together cohesively, that everyone was supporting each other, that everyone's able to excel at what they're good at, you know, and building each other up, as opposed to kind of a really toxic work environment that can be very common in the anime industry. And then I think that really just shows in how playful and how alive these characters really feel and appear on screen. And he just talks about how if he can make the audience and fans feel or remember moments from their childhood where they felt free, where they felt that kind of curiosity, you know, that sense of exploration, where it's like it might just be your backyard, you know. There's like like at the end of the day, the scope of this film is really small. You know, it's literally just their town. Of course, like people, you know, like scientists come in and it's a whole thing. But ultimately, the entire story takes place in a single sleepy suburb town in Japan. But as a child and through the lens of a child, it feels so much larger and the stakes feel so much higher. And so that was something that he talked about a lot.
Oh, one thing that you can also look forward to besides the Reddit would be, we did capture a video with his interview for our release. So at some point, we may be able to introduce you to what he talked about for this piece on American influences, which might be of interest to you.
Still, I would be stuck on the graphic content, but my situation, like when what's his name? The little guy?
Oh, Aoyama?
You mean the protagonist?
The little guy.
Aoyama.
Protagonist?
Mhm.
Okay, I was wondering, like, once him and co-protagonist, once she and him went into that ocean part, I feel that it should have been a change in the graphics. It would have pulled the audience more closer. You know, I like the sound. You know, the sound is totally, it's great. But I was looking for a perspective, like, because most animated
Right.
It switched up, had some sort of enlightenment at that.
Yeah. Ultimately, like what we want to do is just be, for our perspective, I think, as the distributor, is ultimately, like we didn't produce the film. I love the film. I love all of it, but also that's kind of what we have to do as the distributor anyway, is that we represent the film in a forward-facing way, and we're the ones who are gonna, if anyone's gonna come out to bat for the film, it's definitely us, and it's definitely, we're proud of this film, not that we made it, but in the way that, like, we want to just, show people how great it is. And that's kind of the mission of the company too, is to, take these films from Japan and really get them the biggest audience that we can.
Yeah. Well, I think.
I wish we had a billboard.
It would look so good on a billboard.
I think from my perspective, I've got a lot of reviews so far that came in like 71, and I'm still expecting more. You have a whole niche following, so Variety reviewed and gave a really nice review to the film. But you go to and there's with anime or animation, or even if you're at Comic-Con, there's so many people that cover these things, and so you're gonna get all kinds of blogs, and even some of the YouTube reviews have had over 100,000 people watch them. So from my perspective, because normally if I do a movie that's like a studio movie or an independent, and they star people like Andy McDowell or Radha Mitchell or whoever, that's a whole different level of money that you're gonna put into marketing and stuff. But with anime, it has its own niche. You have people that like it. The same thing when last year when I launched Megalobox on Crunchyroll, we had 200,000 downloads in the first week, and but that was because there's a whole different group of people that cover that film, and a very unique fan base. But I'm sure Atsuko and Chris, they have why don't you share your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, as far as like effectiveness, short answer, I think, as cliche as it is now, I think that our influencer spends were very effective this time. And as like film students, right, like it's really important to know your market, right? And so in our case, right, we're looking for anime fans, and then hoping to like branch out to like obviously wider audiences because it can. But for that core anime fan base, you have to kind of realize that there's a culture of like I guess hesitancy to see things in theaters, and also just kind of to support monetarily. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There's kind of like the history of anime in the US, kind of being on TV and then disappearing, so people have to go to piracy. There's the younger demographic, which means people have less spending money, and so they'd rather spend their money on something more permanent, like a DVD or merchandise, rather than going to see in a theater, right? And so all these things combined leads to word of mouth being so important for our films. And so part of our word of mouth strategy, is getting people who are reputable in the anime industry, or just personalities that people enjoy watching and trust, and getting them to see the film. That's another big thing, is we don't believe in paid promotion by people who don't believe in the film. We don't want it to kind of just be like, oh yeah, they're gonna pay me, so I'll promote it. It's like we want people to watch it, like, hey, do you like this? Is this on brand for you? And then have them push it, because then that's so much more authentic. Their fans know that it's authentic, and then so they take that as a real kind of recommendation, almost like from a friend, a trusted friend, where they're like, yeah, you should go see this. This is amazing. Like, I think this is good, this is good, this is good. And, maybe like it wasn't so great on this, but you can figure it out for yourselves, And then that kind of authenticity, especially nowadays, I think is really valuable and really important to consider in your marketing, especially when you're smaller like us. We don't have a huge marketing budget, so we can't just do the billboards and just like hit people over the head with it, like, hey, it's coming out in a week, it's coming out in a week, oh, 6 days, 5 days, 4 days. So kind of like getting that personal touch is really important, especially for our market.
I agree with influencer, word of mouth, and also social media these days, especially. There are so many options, but at the end of the day, I would say that compared to even our past titles, I think we are shifting more and more to the digital side. And we ended up using very selective methods. So we will see. I think it worked out fine for for the best for the title. So it was interesting.
And it's always a work in progress. You know, things are always shifting. We're trying new like ad types, you know, and different like because you never want to get complacent, you know. So you always want to try something new, and if something works, then you keep doing it. If something stops working or isn't working, then you just cut it out and you move on.
But also, at the end of the day, even when we say digital opportunities like this kind of face-to-face interaction, this also leads to great word of mouth. So thank you so much for coming out tonight.
So as far as distribution, like when you're acquiring a film, what are the things that you guys look for, or your company looks for to acquire a film distribute?
It definitely varies, but I think like one of the big things that we talk about a lot is trying to find what kind of that marketing hook is going to be. So obviously like, this is a more original title, but at the very least we can talk about the director did have an acclaimed short film. We can talk about that it's based on this novel that people know from a novelist that people know. So even if people in the U.S., if you don't speak Japanese, you have not read this novel for sure. But you know the author and you maybe know one of the films that is based on one of his books. And so we can kind of tie it in that way. So I think a lot of what we're looking for with acquisitions is some sort of big hook tie-in. Also, quality. If something's good, we can find a way to market it. And especially, like Chris said, because word of mouth is so important with anime especially, and with our business because our budgets are so much smaller than something like Disney or something, that we need people to go talk about it. We need to be able to show it at a con and know that even if 100 people go see it at that convention, hopefully all of them are leaving and gonna go talk to their friends about it, or at least half of them go talk to their friends about it and tell them why it's so great. So stuff like that is really obviously quality, but I think also then some sort of marketing hook too.
Right. One thing that you might notice if you go to Rotten Tomatoes, which is a very highly respected movie critic site, well, we have 100 tomato meter score at this point still for this title.
Wow.
As for our past titles,
No.
Not all our past titles.
yeah,
A lot of them.
Makia 2, yes, and definitely for Penguin Highway. So we are garnering more reviews, but it's still at a high 100. So that's something that we're proud about. So in a nutshell, I think we're looking for anime titles that can be enjoyed by people as a movie. So something with a universal theme, and not just, of course, by anime audiences, but more that something that can be shared.
Yes.
So I was wondering, how are you marketing this movie? Are you doing are you marketing like are you marketing more like on the internet, or do you like off? Are you going to conventions, or like what are you doing to like to how do you do it?
It's definitely a combination of both digital conventions.
Yeah, so I'd say for like in person, right? You have screenings like this, screenings like this, screenings at conventions, doing things like if we get the chance to interview the director or people involved in the creation of it, bringing them out for conventions and hosting panels, stuff like that. That's kind of like the real world physical stuff. And then a lot of it will be digital. Also, luckily for us, digital is cheaper. And also our demographic is much younger, so they are like savvy. If you're targeting, 60 plus, you're probably going to have to be more real world, just because tech savviness. And so, yeah, I'd say large chunk of probably the vast majority of our marketing happens online, just because that's where our demographic is.
And even while it's still in digital, one effective method would be for the older audiences would be newsletters we discovered. So we try everything for every demographic.
But also, what's interesting about some of the like social media marketing too is that you can really get very specific, not just in location. So, like, if you're near one of our theaters, we can target you. But we can also target you based on target you. It sounds very scary when I say it out loud, but it's not. But we can also find people who are, specifically in our demographics. So whether that's an age bracket or, for us, a lot of it's going to be we can specifically seek out anime fans. So if you're someone who's following a lot of anime accounts, we can try to market to people who are specifically subscribers to specific YouTube accounts or to specific different anime accounts. If you follow Funimation on Instagram, then you might be getting Service Star ads, like stuff like that. So that, potentially if you're like in this room and you're not an anime fan, you definitely haven't seen our ads in all likelihood. But if you are, then hopefully they are coming to you. And
Yeah. So
Looks like
that's
a-
some. If you
something
ever
have to do on Instagram.
if you ever want an exercise in how much Facebook and Google have on you, try making an advertisement for something. It's really incredible. You can do age, location, interests. Especially if you're like, let's say you link your you signed up for Instagram with your Facebook account, right? Or they're linked for whatever. They're linked. So then it's not so because like people used to like pages on Facebook, right? They don't really do that as much anymore. But for example, let's say you follow I don't know, a health blogger or something, right? Then that data gets turned into like keywords, right? So it's like, oh, they know you like health. Maybe you're into organic foods. Maybe you're into exercise and like kind of like a modern lifestyle, right? And so those kind of get all turned into an algorithm, and then we as a business can choose different keywords, different interests, stuff like that, to target to our ads to.
Yes, Cecilia?
So if an Amazon, right, or a Netflix wants worldwide rights, they're going to go straight to the source. Um, However, in our recent deals, our rights that we own include streaming. And so we would be the ones brokering that. Whether or not they show up is really up to negotiation, and also just how Netflix is feeling today or tomorrow or next month. Maybe Disney Plus is feeling like, hey, let's get in on this anime. Or maybe they're looking at their numbers and they're going, oh, you know what? Streams of anime movies are down right now, so we're not going to put too much money into that. And they might not answer our calls. So it really, like with streaming, it can be very finicky, especially because the space is so dominated by like just a few players. So I'd like to say, like, hey, we've got a partnership with Amazon. All of our films are going to be on there, and it's like kind of a consistency. But at this point, we don't have a deal like that.
Yes. Yep, go ahead.
Is that all y'all focus on? Is anime? I mean, is that what 11 Arts' primary thing is?
Our department, yes.
Yes.
So 11 Arts.
There are other films and
We do.
genres and stuff as well.
We also do live action. If you're asking specifically for distribution,
I'm just curious as to what y'all what all y'all focus on, or is it just anime? Because like when I was tying into that question earlier about the demographic thing, like who did y'all target this to? Like what range would it be targeted to? Because to me it's more of an adult movie. So like I'm 34 and I could see similarities in the child and the adults, you know what I'm saying? But I've thought it was more of like a teenage kind of like where it would have fit into my life, you know. So I'm just
It's
curious as to
interesting.
then you're definitely one of our biggest fans and audience members. So so because for the live action we do distribution for that too. The last one we did in theaters would be A Bride for Rip Van Winkle by Shunji Wai. That's a Japanese director. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar, but he's definitely an acclaimed Japanese director, and it was it was difficult to market, to be honest, just in the sense that anime fans have a bigger number in the US for starters. So like the numbers that we could release in theaters was vastly different. And also it's not the same kind of demographic. So it seems like you do fit into our live act. Yes?
Well, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but like that's what I'm saying.
Mm.
Okay, so the story was awesome, and the writer's ability to continue the story and keep my attention is awesome because I'm very prone to just going somewhere off in left field. But like, I didn't understand the penguin and the Jabberwockies, and like I don't understand what's like significance. Plus, then you had the ET type situation, but to me, it was more of like a spiritual thing. It was more of like a head like a angel like an angelic type thing. And but then it also had another thing that kind of trailed me off on one thing. Like at the end, if you notice, all of the things that she was turning into penguins was all materialistic man-made objects, and then they returned back to like nature after they saved the world. So like there was kind of like a recycling type, like save the planet type
Yeah.
vibe. So I'm all over the place whenever it comes to my brain. I'm like, I don't know which way to go. Like,
Well,
so
that's
that's
like the
my
beauty of the movie.
Yeah, I
too.
think that I think that's kind of a little bit at least, and we're not the filmmakers, so like we can't speak to their intention, but that feels kind of like some of the intention and what you're supposed to get out of it. I think though with anime audiences, speaking from the marketing and distribution standpoint, is like anime audiences I think are kind of aware. The anime trends a little bit more adult. It's not quite like the way when we like a typical US audience thinks about like cartoons are for kids and animation is for kids, which obviously is like super kind of out the window these days anyway when you look at like some of the Pixar movies and Coco and stuff like that. That's a lot more adult, but still ultimately they're like 4 quadrant family films, and that's not how anime works. So it where there are things that are more adult. There are some hard R animes, which this isn't one of them, and this is something that we marketed to. Our aim was families. Our aim was like young adult, like anime fans and people who are kind of cinephile into movies. So that would be more, 15 to 35, and then also like adults who are kind of interested in this type of film but would want to take their kids because this is something you could definitely take your kid to. But you definitely need that sort of even adult who's kind of a little more, willing to kind of venture out into seeing, a foreign language animated film, which is very different than, being like, okay, kids, we're going to finally go see, Ugly Dolls. It's just a very different type of animation marketing.
So the answer was that you marketed it towards families, and in hopes that you were targeting from children to teens to adults within a family setting. Basically, is the demographic.
Yeah, but families, but we're not really targeting the kids the way like if you're marketing something like Ugly Dolls or some of the more or Toy Story or something like that, kids are gonna see those ads on Disney Channel and stuff like that. But you can it's at a lower budget. It's a lot harder to target children. It's also hard, because they don't spend money. So
Well,
we need the people who are gonna actually,
the adults,
yeah,
but yet it's friendly for the children to be able to sit in
exactly,
the room
so
watching
that
the movie.
they'll bring them and buy a ticket for them too, and that helps us.
So I mean, yeah, I've watched a lot of parts.
Yeah, go ahead.
What I was thinking about, like, while I was watching this movie was, because, like, my first introduction to, like, the more adult theme, like, anime that's still, like, it still seems a bit innocent was, like, I watched In My Corner of the World, if you've ever seen that movie. When I watched it, I was going into it thinking that was going to be pretty light themed, and so, like, obviously it was not.
It is not.
Anyway, so like, but I wouldn't have seen that. Like, I wouldn't have seen that if I what do you call it? I don't know where I'm trying to go with it. But like, I was looking at it from like oh, this is gonna be a good anime, like with like the frame by frame kind of art style that I like, the kind of picturesque art style that so many different anime companies do that I love so much.
it'll really depend on the title. Um, so for example, like in this corner of the world, right? Like, would you have been as inclined to see it if you knew how heavy it was gonna be, right? So it's like, so for example, we had a drama recently called Makia. You know, it's a fantasy set drama. Excellent, excellent film. Pretty much everyone who sees it like leaves the theater crying, but like in a good way, you know. But the thing is, and so like for that film, you know, maybe you can kind of upsell the drama aspect of it, right? Whereas the Penguin Highway, right, it kind of throws you for a loop in the last half hour, right? But from a marketing standpoint, you can't confuse your audience like that. You can't be like, oh, look at all this whimsy and fun, and also there's a twist, and also like it's like sci-fi, and like the world folds in on itself, you know, and it's like that's your 30-second ad, you know. So within a 30 seconds, you can't possibly convey that all in a way that's cohesive, that's positive, that makes sense, that is enticing. So a lot of times when it comes to marketing, right, you kind of package the film in a way that's digestible within 30 seconds, you know. Um, I don't think we try not to be disingenuous, you know, we're not trying to lie to people, you know. I think when you see the trailer for Penguin Highway and you come in, like you get what you were looking for, but also I think you get a bit more, you know. And it's a film that really makes you think. And in that sense, I don't think that's a bad thing at all, you know, but it's just in terms of making that messaging, you have to be very straightforward. You need like very, because also it's an ad, you know, people aren't like actively seeking out to watch your trailer a lot of the time. So when you kind of throw it in front of someone, it needs to be easy to understand, exciting, um, yeah, and not not terribly complicated, not making people confused or like, what did I just watch? Because then they'll forget about it.
But we also think about the marketing in different ways depending on what audience that we're looking to
That too.
attract as well. So with Penguin Highway, we had some that were really like, okay, let's show a lot of penguins, a lot of cute stuff. Let's put some whimsical music. Even we had some trailers where we pulled stock music that felt a little bit more like classic kind of like American animated trailer sort of music, just to give it a little more of that like family friendly vibe. And then we had some where we used the gorgeous music from the film and had all the artful shots and kind of took it a little more slowly and tried to aim it more toward that art cinema indie audience. And that's like a bit of a, even though it's the same movie and ultimately it's still like both audiences are like, oh, penguins cute, like that's a lot of the thing that we're marketing toward. It's different in kind of the vibe that we're trying to deliver, even though the film itself for both those audience probably delivers on what they're looking for, which is ultimately what we need too, is when they go see the film, they get what they paid for when they watched our ad.
So I have a question I'm going to ask, you know, each one of you is, compared to other titles that you guys have come out with in the last year, like A Silent Voice, Makia, Liz and the Bluebird, you know, what were the things that you really, you know, found that you had, you know, to do differently with this movie? And, you know, the thing, you know, like what, you know, where did you kind of feel like you grew the most, you know, as far as like expansion?
I'll start. Um, so with Penguin, definitely there's a lot of firsts in this movie. First time feature director, first time feature studio, um, and so and no existing IP, right? Or not, at least not in the U.S. So definitely one thing that this film didn't have was name recognition. So really starting from the ground up was a big challenge for us there. You know, kind of like, yeah, there's like the author, you know, and the director had done some shorts, but ultimately you're not throwing on like from the director of Your Name, you know, or from the like animate like from a producer from Studio Ghibli, you know. Um, so we don't have that to kind of lean on. That was definitely something that was different from our other titles. Usually our other titles have a bit more pedigree. This one did not. But definitely we learned a lot from that, you know, because obviously when you're faced with a challenge, you have to meet it, you know. So we're just gonna give up. So definitely learned a lot on how best to kind of build a brand for a film, making sure that you're targeting the right people who are receptive to your film. Um, and also just a little bit of playing by ear, you know, kind of seeing what works, what doesn't. What are people saying about it, you know, is really big. We're always following like the social media hashtags, figuring out what works, what doesn't, what people liked, what they didn't. So it was a very alive process for this film. I think, and we were, because of the less certainty in how we're marketing it. Um, it also led to some flexibility in kind of how we tackled it. So
Ditto everything Chris said.
Oh, for me, I would just say yes, mostly what Chris said too. But for me, one of the titles that we really pushed hard last year was called Makia, uh, by a female director. Um, so we had this strong female angle to it, and it also featured a female character. So for me personally, it resonated very well, and I took it to, with Deborah's help, a lot of female-related organizations which help promote it, screen it, spread the word on how good it is, how much it makes you cry. So it was, in a way, it was one of the easier titles for me to market. Um, but still, I think for this one, since it didn't have that kind of angle, I had to kind of, me as a female employee, I had to reset my mindset and look for what was the strongest point for this title. So that was one of the biggest challenges for me.
Yes. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Pretty much for like 11 arts, what would be something you guys are hoping for, come future terms of, what you would like to license or distribute, and also if there is anything you would pretty much change in how the way you guys distribute these movies and these films, what would it be?
I think a lot of what we're trying to do right now is expand the scope of our business. Our business used to be like just like 3 years ago, even 2 years ago, was mostly strictly theatrical, and now we're expanding into home video, merchandise, and streaming, and all these other uh, angles where we can kind of monetize the films and also get the film in front of more people. So I think a lot of it for us is just kind of expanding that business and finding, because with the anime audience, like Chris said, it's they're not necessarily willing to spend that first dollar. They're not super excited to spend money on something they don't know. But with an anime audience, what's great about them is that once they love something, they'll just like burn cash at it, you know? And it's just, you know, because once you love it, it's, I want the Blu-ray, and I want the special edition, and I want the T-shirt, and I want the figure, and I want all the stuff. And then, you know, so it's an interesting marketing thing, because it's not trying to get, you know, it's not like a big studio movie where you need a bunch of aloof people to come into the theater and be like, yeah, sure, I'll see Shazam. I don't, you know, and there's hardcore fans of Shazam, but it's different in that we're trying to get a handful of people to come and say, I want to spend $100 on all the things that you're going to give me for this title. And it's a little bit of a different in its focus.
Okay, we have time for one more. Go ahead.
Okay, my question, I have a professor, which was Greg Kowalski, and he actually had said that Roadrunner actually came about like during the war, like World War I and stuff like that. So was it any kind of, I've heard, I don't know, it's mostly China, Beijing, they mostly have like, you know, conflicts with the government and stuff like that. So did any kind of crisis or any kind of real world, tragedies or something like that, was that depicted in that writer's content? Or he's just normal, cartoonist that write cartoons? Are you made the book into a cartoon? Was it any kind of conflictual moments with the writer in society that made him write that story? Or where did he
I can't.
come up with that idea of the pink?
I don't believe in, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong on our panel, but I don't believe that we know exactly like the writer's inspiration for the book. But also, just to be clear, the writer of the book is not an animator. It's a novelist, and then it was adapted by. There's a screenwriter.
Right.
Everybody who worked on the movie is from Japan. Yeah.
So the involvements are pure intellectual performance of cartoons. So you guys like gather like a football team would do, like they watch the other football team's movie before they go onto the field, plays and stuff like that. So you guys put your animated points together from other animated
We don't do any of the animation. Unfortunately, we can't
how did
like.
you guys build that up to that particular point? Was this something that you guys wanted? I mean, do the animation, or was it from being in that
I don't.
honor?
Yeah, I don't think we can speak to any of that just because we're not animators, we're distributors, which is if you get one thing out of this, distribution is a thing, and there are other aspects of releasing films than just making them. But thanks, guys.
Okay, so, you know, I'd like, okay, sure, go ahead.
Ooh, love that
Wow.
question.
Yeah.
Oh man. No, it is, but luckily I've been asked this many times. Personally, I love Princess Mononoke. That's like my all-time favorite. For a number, I could talk about it forever, but I won't.
It's our film, which is like super lame. I know I'm like towing the company line, but big fan of Makia. It is both like high fantasy, like like people keep comparing it to Lord of the Rings, but also it like makes you weep, just like very nice. That seems like a net positive.
For me, it would be Your Name. I have the deluxe edition. I didn't hesitate to buy it. I still cry every time I watch it.
For me, I would say it would be two. It'd be Makia and then also Megalobox. You know, very different. You know, obviously, one's about a boxer, the other one's a female fantasy. But you know, I mean, I think they're both great.
But thanks so much, guys, for coming out, and thanks for sticking around and listening to us talk about the fun, exciting world of anime distribution. And tell your friends about Penguin Highway, because I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.